This podcast is brought to you by North Carolina's electric cooperatives.
This is NC Spin, an unrehearsed discussion on issues of interest to North Carolinians. Now, here is your moderator, Tom Campbell.
Thank you for watching this week's NC Spin. Instead of leftover turkey hash, it's time to gnaw on some meaty issues. And on our menu, in addition to bad puns, is a discussion about the growing urban-rural schism of voting and how it impacts political power. We'll examine two different national tests and discuss why they may have different scores but the same meaning for our students. And we won't leave you until our panelists tell us something we don't know. Speaking of the panel, we've got a great one this week. They include Bob Orr, former Supreme Court Justice, John Hood, syndicated columnist and author, Chris Fitzsimon, our senior political analyst, and Cash Michaels, one of our favorite journalists and filmmakers. We begin our uninterrupted debate after these brief messages from our underwriters.
From treating the newest member of your family to helping a loved one make end-of-life decisions, your family physician is with you every step, for every stage of life, for every member of your family. Despite a healthcare landscape fraught with potential landmines, family physicians across North Carolina are providing you a lifetime of committed, dependable medical care. Family Physicians, your trusted healthcare advisor for life.
Production underwriting support provided in part by the more than 65,000 members of the North Carolina Retired Governmental Employees Association.
They're up before dawn and work late into the night. They believe in hard work, family, and doing the right thing. They stand up for their communities when others walk away. They're good people who just want a fair shake. They are farmers. At North Carolina Farm Bureau, we are proud to stand with our farmers.
Let's get started. When we were analyzing the midterm elections a week or so ago, we said it was obvious that Democrats are gaining ground in urban areas where there are younger, better educated, higher wage residents. And we also noted that rural areas are generally solidly Republican but are losing population. And we wondered how these and other trends would play out in future elections. Bob Orr, if Republicans are to remain in power, can they capture more of these urban voters? And conversely, if Democrats are going to take control of our state, they got to figure out how to get more rural support. What do they got to do in order to politically control our state?
Well, I think the Republican problem is that their primary demographic is old white men and people who don't have a college education. And in the urban areas, that's a demographic that is shrinking and is going to continue to shrink. And so for the Republicans to have any success long-term in urban areas, they're going to have to broaden their message. They're going to have to broaden their perspective on who their voters should be. When it comes to the rural communities, I think we've got real problems in the sense of people moving to rural areas versus the urban areas. And so I think there's going to be a shrinking population, and it's hard to get young people to move back home or young people to move there.
John, you wrote a column a couple of weeks ago that I thought was particularly fascinating, and if
it stood out because it was actually interesting.
That would be that would be an unusual experience. But go ahead.
Where did I lose control? You guys take a break for Thanksgiving, and then I'm just out of control here. So far as it goes, what I got from that essentially was you said that the Republicans should just essentially give up on these urban areas, that they're going to be democratically controlled. Is that right?
No, I wasn't saying that at all. What I was getting at is that the urban-rural divide that we're describing is an insufficient description because it leaves out the actual battlegrounds, which are the suburbs. And in fact, the suburbs really is constituted with an inner suburb, for example, suburban areas of a Wake or a Mecklenburg or a Guilford County, and then the outer suburbs, the communities that ring those urban core counties that are still Republican. My point about that was that Republicans used to do well in both inner and outer suburbs. They did well in 2016, but they lost significant ground in 2018. They can't both maintain and maybe grow their legislative majorities without doing better in those suburban areas, and they certainly can't win statewide without them. but it wasn't that long ago that they won them, so they can do it again. One challenge is clearly Trump. It's Donald Trump himself. It's the brand that he has created for the Republican Party since his election. But there are other issues, too. Republicans have to figure out how to talk to those voters more effectively. But the flip side is the Democrats can't get to majorities in the legislature by only winning where they won the other week.
Chris, I've just put you in charge of Republican messaging for North Carolina.
It's something I've always wanted to do.
All right. So what is the message for Republicans to capture more of these urban and ex-urban and suburban voters?
Well, you've given me quite a job, but I mean, I do think.
Well, it's a big paycheck.
Well, the first thing is if the Republican Party is Donald Trump's party, it's not going to work. I mean, they have to move beyond Donald Trump, and he's still the president, and the Trump faction is still alive and well in Washington. So that's a big first huge problem in the short term. In the long term, the best way I could describe it would be Republicans have to figure out a message that looks forward and doesn't look backward about preserving things the way they are. Well, the issues are they have to somehow figure out education, because whether I think it's justified, but even if you don't think it's justified, they lose when you start talking about public schools and health care.
I was going to say they can't run away from health care.
And I think some of the other issues that urban people care about, which are transportation inside urban areas. I think climate change has hurt them, especially with young and millennial voters. It's all the things about the future which they somehow have ceded to the Democrats, because in many ways they're appealing to older white people, older white men like me, who they think want to look backwards and take things back to where they are. Things are never going to be the way they were in 1950. In some ways, the core Republican message is still that message.
And so far as it goes, Cash, I've just made you in charge of the messaging for Democrats.
They're in trouble now.
In rural areas, what's the message that they've got to convey to rural voters to try to capture more votes? Because John says correctly, they can't get there just by urban votes.
We're talking about a cultural shift here in thinking, and one thing the Republicans have done an excellent job of is demonizing Democrats and who the perceived base of the Democratic Party is. Which is, for all intent and purposes, communities of color and other groups that are normally not seen as being part of the faith. Barack Obama said something when he first ran for president that got him in a lot of trouble, that folks in rural areas cling to their guns and cling to their guns and their Bibles. And a lot of people jumped on him for that. But there isn't a modicum of truth to that. And that's something that the Democrats have to speak to. Those folks in the rural areas, it's very important. All they have is their work and their faith. Their guns are part of their faith, believe it or not. And until Democrats know how to speak to that community or speak to those communities and to make them understand that they have a part to play in the future, they're never going to crack that egg.
Let's talk to, you've run statewide for office before, several times, as a matter of fact. Yeah. So far as it goes, we've gotten to a point, Bob, in statewide elections where about 20, 25 counties, mostly urban populations, can control who wins elections.
Well, certainly on a statewide basis, that's true. And as we've all said, the demographics of North Carolina is changing dramatically. There aren't a lot of folks left who grew up in North Carolina, whose families have been in North Carolina for many, many decades. So it's a younger, it's a more diverse group. And the problem the Republican Party has, and it's somewhat like what Cash mentioned, if the NRA and guns and the Family Policy Council are sort of the two driving forces of the Republican message, it may resonate in certain pockets, but to this new broader spectrum of citizens, they're interested in health care, transportation, education, and as Chris says, a more forward-looking message.
Let me shift.
I think that Bob's onto something, but I think, see it differently in the sense that the Republicans, if they abandon their commitment to the Second Amendment or their commitment to family, I mean, they are a dead party, completely dead. They have to add to that a credible message on these other matters that voters are interested in, but they cannot abandon their base. The entire idea of getting a majority is take your base and add. Now, the problem they've got is partly the way that some of those issues are expressed or the personalities that are expressing it are a turnoff to the other voters they need to get. So they have both parties, if either party just repairs to a certain base, that's a small minority of the population and they lose. They have to build coalitions.
Let me shift a little bit here, Chris. Leslie Boney, who's a friend of all of ours, who's head of the Emerging Issues, Institute for Emerging Issues, was doing an interview not long ago, and he said that there's some trends that are troublesome, and they're particularly evident in rural areas. He said there's a 58% decline in rural civic club participation, 43% decline in people talking with their neighbors, a decline in church attendance, and instead of working together, particularly in civic organizations, they have retreated from their front porches to their air-conditioned TV homes.
And their Facebook pages.
Yeah, and why is this such a dramatic trend in rural areas?
Well, I think you have to make a little bit more of an effort in rural areas. It's further to the church or the civic club or the corner store than it is in Raleigh or Durham or Charlotte is one thing. But I think, we haven't talked about technology yet. I do think that, I was kidding about Facebook, but not really. I mean, I think that we have a whole different political discussion. People get their information from different ways. If you have a specific point of view, whether it's good or bad or extremist or not, you can chat with somebody in California about it all day. You don't have to go to the church or the community store to find people who agree with you on things. And I think we have to figure out in this new technological world, when we all have a computer in our pocket and we're playing games with people across the world, we sort of lose track of the guy down the street. And I'm not sure our politics has yet caught up with that.
One of the things that people talk about in these rural areas is the fact that we don't have the stores there to attract younger people and so forth like that. But more and more that's becoming not so much of an issue because, I mean, heck, we've got giant stores like Sears and Penny's and so forth like that are either going bankrupt or in trouble. And if you've got the internet in a rural area, you can do all the shopping you want.
Yeah, but Tom, even in the urban areas, clearly in our rural areas, per what you've put on the table for Leslie Boney, we've lost a sense of community. If people feel the need to retreat to whatever they own or wherever they live and cut themselves off, disconnect from everyone else around them, because they want to live in their world, believe what they want to believe. They want to sit down and they want to have a good time watching their Fox News or listen to Limbaugh, whatever else. That shows you there's a stratification or further stratification in our society that is quite dangerous.
And that's part of what's made these communities so attractive. I mean, I grew up in rural eastern North Carolina, and I mean, there was a community there. You felt a sense of people talking to each other and working with each other and so forth like that. Is this just something that has gone that can't come back, Bob?
I think it's a real challenge, in part because of the social media aspect that Chris mentioned, but I find it hard to find young people, particularly college graduates or kids leaving law school, who want to go back to any place in rural North Carolina, east or west. Wow. I mean, they just want to be where the action is. They want to be in Charlotte. They want to be in Raleigh. They want to be in Asheville. And so I think it's really hurting our rural communities in so many different ways, because that sort of fresh blood that generates or regenerates a community is now going elsewhere.
Well, yes, we're having there's no question about it. There's a brain drain in many sections of rural North Carolina, and yet, John, there are evidences that some small towns are actually regaining population. People are moving back because that's where they want to raise their kids. That's where they want to live. And by the way, it's cheaper for housing, and it doesn't take too much longer to get to work from some of these rural areas than it does driving across town in a Raleigh or Charlotte.
This is what I was about to say. Your category of rural areas that are doing okay or better than okay is largely constituted by communities that are either within a reasonable commuting distance of the urban centers where the employment is, or shopping or whatever people might want. Or there are, of course, some other places that are doing very well. They tend to be catering to retirees, to people who have a lot of discretionary income and aren't necessarily looking for jobs but looking for quality of life. Those two categories include lots of rural places, but obviously not all rural places. Many places are not going to benefit from those particular trends for a variety of reasons. And so we're seeing different experiences in different parts of rural North Carolina. And remember that, Monroe, when I was a kid, was rural. Cabarrus County was rural.
Yeah.
Lincoln County was rural. These are places that are growing rapidly because they're becoming suburbanized.
Right. They're commuting counties.
Yeah.
Chris, a week or so ago, right before Thanksgiving, it was announced that Amazon had made their decision, and Raleigh was not going to be where they were going to locate. They were going to split their headquarters, HQ2, in New York and
Northern
suburbs of Washington. Number one, I haven't found many people that seem to be terribly upset that we didn't get that. But the question is, it's reported that our state was willing to give better than $2 billion in direct and indirect economic incentives. And I guess the question I've got, as particularly as it relates to rural North Carolina, why don't we take the money we're willing to give to an Amazon and plow it back into some of these rural areas and help them?
Well, that would be, I'm not a fan of what they offered Amazon, but it's worth pointing out, that Scott Walker gave Foxconn more money than that to come to Wisconsin. It turns out one of the plants is being automated, not even creating the jobs. I think there's a general consensus.
And they're saying it's going to be 20, excuse me for interrupting you, but they said it's going to be 25 years before Wisconsin ever gets an economic.
If they do, but I don't think I think there's a general consensus that all of us don't like giant incentives to lure companies, and some would argue, some political folks would argue, you have to be in the game to do that. But to get to your point, if we knew exactly what we could invest in these rural areas to help them, I think that certainly we need transportation. I think we need better schools in rural areas, and we have a lot of rural areas that schools are decaying, they haven't been rebuilt, all sorts of those things we should have already done and we should do, right? Yeah. But beyond that, you can't force people to move there. I'm not sure what exactly. Beyond all those things, we need a great community college, we need good public schools, we need roads and all sorts of those things, but I'm not sure what the state could do.
Well, East Carolina is in our university system as a whole, but East Carolina's got what they call the Rural Prosperity Initiative. They believe that higher education can play a definite role in helping people come back together again and better educating people, and from that improving the economy. Is this pie in the sky thinking, Cash?
No, I was very pleased to read about that because it is per higher education that the research is being done where the numbers are being tabulated. So we now know that folks in our rural areas have higher instances of high blood pressure and diabetes, and they're dying earlier. We know obviously economically that they are suffering and they need an influx of help there. So educationally we know they need help. We wouldn't know that unless we had higher education committed to that. And it looks like the ECU perspective is what we should be going with, and indeed expand across higher education.
This program seems to have a tremendous amount of promise to it. It'll be interesting to see just how much actually comes from it. Speaking of education, the two major testing programs that track how well our graduating high school students are performing are the ACT and the SAT. And it's interesting that both have recently reported on North Carolina's test scores. Our state requires all high school seniors to take the ACT, and scores indicate only 46% met the benchmark for English, 35% for reading, 31% for math, and 25% for science. The results of the SAT were different, but that's only because only 52% of our students actually took the test. These scores place our state slightly ahead of the national average with a mean SAT score of 1098. Cash, the hard truth is found in the SAT testing. Those who took the SAT basically are our better students, generally from middle to upper income homes. So when we add to the mix the students from lower socioeconomic circumstances, the scores drop very badly. What can we do to help those students who start off behind and stay that way?
I think we have enough history now to realize that creating high poverty schools in our communities does not work because we don't put the resources in these schools. We do not send the real talent to these schools to help these students. And also, too, this idea of if we improve our schools, but we don't improve the communities that they're in, that we're going to get positive results, I think that's failed as well. We have to do both. It makes no sense to take a poor kid who leaves a situation where either one parent at home or no one's working, no real food at home or what have you, poor health care, send them to school, expect them to do very well, and then leave there and go back to that that environment that they're going to excel in life. That's crazy. So we need to address both problems, the school and the community.
And Bob, the headline on this story about the SAT was lauding the fact that we were ahead of the national average. But when you read down the fine print inside the story, it shows you only 53% of our students who took the test are actually meeting the benchmark for reading, writing, and math. What's the real story here?
I think there are a lot of stories, one of which is, we're a fast-growing population. So a lot of those kids taking those tests maybe have only been in North Carolina for a year or two. Secondly, I think the focus on the public schools, while there's been attention about teacher salaries, we have not seen the kind of statewide attention to strengthening public schools versus what I would call alternative schools, private, using vouchers, charter schools, et cetera. And so to reinforce what Cash is saying, there has to be a strong pre-K program so that you're getting kids prepared for school. You got to figure ways to get parents engaged, particularly those from low-wealth communities, because the opportunities is there. It's one of the great geniuses of our state constitution is this free public school education that's provided to everybody. But we've lost that sense of how valuable a real education is.
John, so far as it goes, okay, the scores, test scores are pretty dramatic, pretty clear. The majority of students who are not doing well are minorities who come from lower socioeconomic. Are we doing them a disservice by trying to put them mainstreamed into every classroom where you've got high achievers and medium achievers and low achievers? It makes the job for a teacher difficult. Now, the converse of that is we're resegregating schools, and I don't think anybody wants to do that.
And I think you were actually getting it more about classes.
Yes.
There are challenges with teachers when they have students of varying degrees of preparation and ability. But the alternative is there are peer effects. So if you have students who are radical, if you track all the students early in life, then the downside of that is obvious, which is that students who are low performing at fourth grade and they're in class with lots of other low performing fourth graders, that is, research has showed, is not necessarily a good plan either. That's one of the arguments about diversifying any kind of class or school. So I think that the first thing about these test scores is that it is more complicated than people think. You have to make appropriate adjustments. The state-by-state comparisons are very strange. You don't want to compare states that have 50% participation with a 95% participation. You don't want to compare states unless you're adjusting for student characteristics, because otherwise you're not really measuring what the schools are doing.
But that's really what we want to do, isn't it, Chris? I mean, we want to figure out how well are our students doing as compared to students in Virginia or other states.
I think we want to figure that out if we then want to figure out why states are doing better and how we can copy those things and what we can learn from it. I think that is the key. I think all of us are, in some ways, are agreeing that the focus has to be on the kids who aren't doing well. And Cash and Bob have pointed out that the kids who aren't doing well need extra help, not just in school. It's a long story. A short version is a famous superintendent in a small school system in Kansas. She opened up the school on the weekends and had washers and dryers there for families who didn't have them at home. They could use the washer and dryer if the parents came and brought the kids with them, and the kids were tutored and the parents got to do their wash. It sounds like a dumb thing, but that woman was now promoted, and so the school became a community center that helped the family and just didn't help the student. That's an astonishing thing that it's so unique. That needs to be happening everywhere.
Well, and I guess some of this is we're still emphasizing to all these kids that they need to get a higher education in order to be able to be successful in life, and yet we know that there's only like a third of all the people in North Carolina that have any kind of advanced degree, whether it's an associate or undergraduate degree. Should we change that emphasis and maybe go to emphasizing more so far as skill training for jobs and industries?
Yes. When you look at inner city communities, you would be amazed that we come away thinking that these young people have no skills, but then when you look at some of the nefarious activities some of these kids get into that require great skills, then you say, hey, wait a minute, they're all right, we just have to change what they're doing.
All right, got a minute and 30 seconds left in this show. John Hood, tell us something we don't know.
Well, we were just talking about education, and parental choice in schools came up. It'll be a controversial topic in the next few months. We're one of the top 10 states in the country in school choice options.
Bob Orr, tell us something we don't know.
There's a legislative commission called the Fair Treatment for Student Athletes. It's doing really interesting work on college athletics.
Cash Michaels, tell us something we don't know.
Got a DVD of my latest movie, Al, My Brother, that has just come out, and go to the website to get it.
Senate President Pro Tem Phil Berger looks like will be the Pro Tem again. It'll be his 5th term. He at one point introduced supported term limits to have an 8-year limit.
Well, we got it in. You've heard our spin on the issues of the day. To stay informed all during the week, sign up for our free weekly email newsletter and give your feedback. Visit our website, ncspin.com, or catch us on Facebook. And join us next week when we'll have more balanced debate for the Old North State. Until then, stay informed and watch out for the spin.
From treating the newest member of your family to helping a loved one make end-of-life decisions, your family physician is with you every step, for every stage of life, for every member of your family. Despite a healthcare landscape fraught with potential landmines, family physicians across North Carolina are providing you a lifetime of committed, dependable medical care. Family Physicians, your trusted healthcare advisor for life.
Production underwriting support provided in part by the more than 65,000 members of the North Carolina Retired Governmental Employees Association.
They're up before dawn and work late into the night. They believe in hard work, family, and doing the right thing. They stand up for their communities when others walk away. They're good people who just want a fair shake. They are farmers. At North Carolina Farm Bureau, we are proud